In the early years of the 20th century, a conflict erupted that would reshape the balance of power in East Asia and beyond. The Russo-Japanese War, fought from 1904 to 1905, was a clash between two empires with grand territorial ambitions, the Russian and Japanese empires. The primary battlegrounds were Korea and Manchuria, regions of immense strategic importance. As these nations vied for dominance, their struggle sent shockwaves through the international community, altering diplomatic alliances and setting the stage for future conflicts. This war marked a significant turning point, as Japan's victory challenged the established order and demonstrated the rise of a new military power in the East. It also marked the first time in modern history that an Asian power had defeated one of the larger colonial overlords in a spectacular way. To fully grasp the significance of these two historical events, it is essential to understand the broader geopolitical landscape that shaped them. In the early 20th century, both empires were vying for dominance in East Asia, each with its unique set of ambitions and challenges. The Russian Empire was one of the largest on Earth, spanning from Eastern Europe to Asia. Ruled by Tsar Nicholas II, it sought to expand its influence over Korea and Manchuria, two regions central to this conflict. The construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway further solidified Russia's presence in the area and fueled their territorial ambitions. In contrast, Japan was rapidly modernizing under Emperor Meiji. Their sights were set on establishing themselves as a dominant power in East Asia and securing resources to support their burgeoning economy. Having emerged victorious from the First Sino-Japanese War, from 1894 to 1895, Japan's confidence was at an all-time high, leading them to pursue even greater ambitions. Diplomatic negotiations between the two nations failed to resolve their differences, ultimately leading to increased tensions. When Russia refused to acknowledge Japan's interests in these regions, it set off a chain of events that culminated with the surprise Japanese attack on the Russian fleet, marking the beginning of the war. The Russo-Japanese War comprised of a total of 19 battles, with 4 of these being the most decisive. The battles of Port Arthur, Yellow Sea, Mukden, and Tsushima, each playing a pivotal role in shaping the outcome of the war. The Battle of Port Arthur kicked off with that surprise night attack by Japanese destroyers on the Russian fleet anchored at Port Arthur, Manchuria. Admiral Togo Heihachiro led the Japanese fleet, which included 6 pre-dreadnought battleships, 9 armored cruisers, 15 destroyers, and 20 torpedo boats. While on the Russian side, Admiral Oscar Viktorovich Stark commanded a fleet of 7 pre-dreadnought battleships, 1 armored cruiser, and 5 protected cruisers. The Japanese destroyers managed to sneak into the harbor undetected and launched torpedoes at the Russian ships. The Retvizin, Cesarevich, and Palata were hit, but none of them were destroyed. The torpedo nets in the harbor protected much of the fleet, limiting the attack's effectiveness. After the initial chaos, the Russians turned on their searchlights and started firing back, forcing the Japanese to retreat around 2 a.m. The battle continued the next morning with an engagement of major surface combatants. Despite the surprise attack, the battle ended without a clear winner, with both sides suffering damage but no decisive victory, paving the way for further much larger engagements. The Battle of the Yellow Sea began when Russian warships, trapped at Port Arthur, made a desperate attempt to break out and join the rest of their Pacific fleet at Vladivostok. The Japanese blockading fleet, led by Admiral Heihachiro, quickly pursued and engaged the Russian fleet in the Yellow Sea. The battle was one of the first naval engagements fought entirely by steel ships firing explosive shells. The Russian fleet, commanded by Rear Admiral Wilhelm Wittgeft, consisted of 6 battleships, 4 cruisers, and 14 destroyers. The Japanese fleet included 4 battleships, 10 cruisers, 18 destroyers, and 29 torpedo boats. For several hours, the two fleets exchanged heavy gunfire at distances of up to 7 miles. The Japanese flagship, Mikasa, took considerable damage during the intense battle, and Admiral Togo had to transfer command to the battleship Asahi. A critical hit on the Russian flagship, Cesarevich, killed Admiral Wittgeft and his senior staff and disabled the ship's steering. This led to a disorganized retreat by the Russian fleet, with several ships being interned in neutral ports. The battle marked a significant moment in the conflict, as it foiled the Russian attempt to break out and join the Vladivostok squadron. The Battle of Mukden was one of the largest land battles before World War I, Japanese forces, led by Field Marshal Oyama Iwao, aimed to surround and destroy the Russian army under General Alexei Kuropatkin. This massive engagement, involving over 500,000 men, and saw some seriously intense combat. This resulting in unbelievable casualties on both sides, totaling an estimated 160,000 men. Despite fierce resistance, the Japanese managed to break through the Russian right flank, causing chaos and forcing Kuropatkin to order a hasty retreat, leaving behind their wounded and supplies in the withdrawal. The scale of the battle was unprecedented, with the Japanese alone firing over 20 million machine gun rounds and nearly 280,000 artillery shells in just over 10 days of fighting. This decisive Japanese victory further weakened Russian resolve and contributed to the eventual end of the war. The Battle of Tsushima was the final and most decisive engagements of the war. The Japanese fleet under Admiral Haihachiro intercepted the Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron, which had sailed from the Baltic Sea. The Japanese, superior in speed and armament, inflicted a crushing defeat on the Russians, sinking or capturing most of their ships. In terms of military strategies and tactics, the Russian Empire leaned heavily on their larger but less modernized forces, hoping to outlast through sheer resilience. In contrast, Japan focused on rapid, decisive victories using their smaller yet more technologically advanced navy and well-trained army. This approach paid off as they were equipped with far more modern ships and torpedoes, which gave them a significant advantage in naval engagements over their foe. This triumph cemented Japan's status as a major military force and significantly shifted the balance of power in East Asia. The Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt on September 5, 1905, officially ended hostilities between the two nations. Under its terms, Russia recognized Japan's interests in Korea while ceding control over key territories such as Port Arthur and the Liaodong Peninsula, along with the southern half of Sakhalin Island to their adversary, an island still disputed today. The technological advancements displayed during this conflict foreshadowed the innovations and horrors that would define World War I just over a decade later. Against the backdrop of economic hardship, social inequality, and the lingering impact of a devastating military defeat, Russia found itself on the precipice of revolution. The defeat exposed the weaknesses of the Tsarist regime and further fueled public discontent, with its large financial burden greatly exacerbating economic problems and leading to increased hardship for the population. Bloody Sunday, on January 22, 1905, served as a turning point. Peaceful protesters led by Father Georgy Gapon were met with gunfire from the Imperial Guard at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, resulting in hundreds of casualties and sparking widespread outrage across Russia. Groups including the Social Democrats, Revolutionaries, Communists, and Liberals all played significant roles in organizing these protests and strikes, with influential figures like Joseph Stalin, Leon Trotsky, and Vladimir Lenin emerging as key leaders during this tumultuous period. In response to the mounting unrest, Tsar Nicholas issued the October Manifesto, promising the creation of a legislative assembly, also known as the Duma in Russia, and granting limited civil liberties. However, these reforms, seen as highly insufficient by many, led to continued dissatisfaction and ongoing protests, a clear indication that the revolution was far from over. The events of the Russo-Japanese War exposed the vulnerabilities of the Tsarist regime and set the stage for the revolutions that followed, laying the groundwork for the eventual overthrow of the Romanov dynasty and the rise of the Soviets. Japan emerged victorious, gaining control over Korea, Manchuria, and the southern half of Sakhalin, which allowed Japan to expand its influence and set the stage for its imperial ambitions in the following decades.